I'm Tim Ventura from AmericanAntiGravity.com, and I'm speaking today with Shelley Thomson, who's going to be speaking about coordinate remote viewing and alien civilizations. Well, Shelley, thank you for joining me. I sincerely appreciate your time, and I'd like to start out by asking you a little bit about remote viewing. Can you tell me a little bit about what it is that you're doing and some of your experiences with it?
Yes, I'll do my best. I learned my skills from a traditional practitioner. To go into the historical background just a little bit, we know a great deal about the physical properties of the world. Physical science has advanced tremendously. We know, in Western civilization, we know comparatively little about acts of mind and how the mind actually works. And the reason for this essentially is, some 1,500 years of religious persecution. The traditional knowledge of acts of mind, obviously mixed with superstitions and other additions, that traditional knowledge was driven underground. And by accident, quite some time ago, I found someone with traditional knowledge. He could do interesting things, and I studied with him. If you are motivated by curiosity, it's sort of the ideal hobby. Now, my academic work is in mathematics and statistics, and I believe I have a good grip on the scientific method. This was an entirely different domain. I never expected these two domains, science and acts of mind, to match up. And it was a very long time before they did.
Okay.
Now, traditional remote viewing is technically called a diffuse astral projection. The truth is that you are where your attention is, so that in the traditional method, you learn to pin your attention somewhere, to focus your attention, and to become able to see and interact with whatever is at the destination. It's a composite of skills that you need to learn. You need to learn to deploy your attention, to stabilize the interface with the destination, how to create change at the destination, and various strategies for controlling the ability of the destination to create change in your space. The tie made by attention is two-way, always. Trees and rocks don't mind being remote viewed. Sorcerers certainly do.
Oh, okay.
You see. So, in any case, it was a very interesting study. And it's not at all like what was done at the Stanford Research Institute.
Well, you know, if it's okay, I'd like to touch on that a little bit because I think most people became familiar with remote viewing through the military work and SRI. And I think it's important to acknowledge that you came to this through a traditional method, and you've had a lot of experience and practice and decades of experience now. And I think it's important to say that the military method doesn't have necessarily a stranglehold on this technique, that it's something that's been with us for thousands or tens of thousands of years. Now, as you've said, it was driven underground, but it sounds like if you're able to find the right person, you can pick up training and learn to do this with practice.
Yes, you surely can. What most people don't realize about the SRI studies is that they were not intended to teach remote viewing. The investigators at SRI, Target Put-Off, believed that the ability to do remote viewing was intrinsic, that it was possessed by every normal person. So they never tried to teach anyone to do it. What they did in the protocols they developed was to find a way to parameterize it and to demonstrate it scientifically. I think their work was brilliant. And, of course, we're all indebted to them for the term remote viewing, which was developed during these studies.
Oh, absolutely. Well, in terms of your work with remote viewing now, you've done this for various clients. You've described to me a couple of clients where they would essentially provide you with the coordinates to remote view, and you would do the work and then take it back to them. Could you describe this a little bit for me?
Well, if you're talking about the alien civilizations work, that came about in a very curious way. after I was always very quiet about my skills, but after Target Put Off published, which was in, 1976, I believe, it became okay to admit that you could do remote viewing, so people knew that I did it. And one day someone called me and said a friend of his was visiting from out of town, a businessman from Southern California, and that he wanted me to do a coordinate remote viewing, and if I'd do that, they'd take me to lunch. Well, fine. I've done many, thousands of coordinate remote viewings. It's an easy technique, and I was proficient, so I hopped in the car and drove down to Stanford and met the businessman, who was your archetypal engineer. Now, in a coordinate remote viewing, they write the coordinates, usually geographical coordinates, but it can be other things, such as the name of a corporation, the initials of a person, whatever. Whatever the coordinates are, they write them on a slip of paper and fold it with the coordinates inside. Then they hand it to the viewer. I, as the viewer, hold that piece of paper in my hand, and I become aware of the tiny difference in my space that it makes to hold that piece of paper. Then I float my attention down to that tiny difference, reflect on it, pin my attention to it, and voila, there I am.
Okay.
I've taught this to many people. In principle, it's an easy technique. And I certainly didn't anticipate any unusual problems with it on this occasion. So I did my work, and I discovered right away that there was resistance. This is quite unusual. And furthermore, it was not resistance from human mental practitioners. I was very familiar with that sort of thing. This was different. And I fiddled with it for a while, and finally I found a loophole. And then I found myself in a large space underground. It was reminiscent of an underground parking garage with no cars in it. It was the air quality seemed chilly and thin, and I found myself looking at some amazing colonnades. It's the most astounding thing I've ever seen. The shape was somewhat like a Roman aqueduct with those curved trusses that hold it up, but the material was composed of many different parts and many different kinds of conduit. What was most impressive about it is the quality I wish I knew how to convey adequately in words. It had a striking cohesion, very unusual. It was as if the workmen who built those colonnades, as if every single workman knew at every instant the exact progress of the work. It was as if the colonnades were built in a single moment by a single mind. So, anyway, I struggled with it for a while and finally decided I had done everything that I could, so I opened my eyes and saw the businessman putting the audio cassette in his shirt pocket. He had a funny expression like it contained the Holy Grail, but I was completely depressed. I thought I had really blown it. In every other coordinate remote viewing I'd ever been asked to do, people always wanted to know whether there was oil on the property, where Grandpa buried the family jewels during the Civil War, or whether this is the location of the Lost Dutchman mine. At any rate, I was depressed and I didn't understand why what I had seen was so strange. So as we're standing in line at the restaurant, waiting for a table for lunch, I asked the businessman, I said, now that you've got the cassette and you have your data, could you please tell me what was really at those coordinates? I know what I said couldn't have had anything to do with what you really wanted to know, but I'd just like to know what was there. At which point he leaned over and actually whispered in my ear, These are the coordinates of a purported flying saucer base.
Wow.
I thought my knees were going to collapse for a moment.
Yeah. Well, that's a big thing to realize.
Yeah, oddly enough, I'd never had any interest in UFOs, I'd never read the literature, and I had never used my skills to investigate UFOs. This came totally out of left field. I was shocked.
Well, now, where did it go from there?
Well, a couple of developments resulted from that. First of all, as soon as we got a table for lunch, and I got a few seconds, I went back to that location, located central control, you might say the brain center of the site, and did as much damage as I could. My reason was that I didn't want them to leave. I wanted to study their technology, and I wanted to make it impossible for them to leave. So I did my best. As it happens, that technology is very vulnerable to attention and just a little bit of psychokinesis. At any rate, now, nothing seemed to happen at the time. About 11 hours later, I was asleep, and suddenly there was a quality of strangeness in the space that woke me up right away. It's very hard to describe, but tremendous waves of power were pulsing through my space, really tremendous. And I realized that whoever owned that facility was looking for me.
Oh, okay.
Scared? Yes. I thought I was going to die, and there wasn't a thing I could do about it.
No.
Well, these waves of power kept going on, and being scared gets boring after a while. So I thought about it, and I realized they're not trying to kill me. They're trying to amplify my signal. That's what that is. So, seeing no alternative, I put my hand up, so to speak, and admitted vandalizing central control. And they weren't angry. They said was, we didn't know anyone was here, meaning any intelligent being was here. They said, should we leave? And I had to make an instant decision. So I said no. I told them we wanted them to stay, and I made them as welcome as I could possibly think of. And we made a deal. They offered to answer any question that I asked. In return, I promised not to bust up central control again and to stay out of their vital systems, not to tamper with their vital systems. And they were as good as their word. All right. Now, meanwhile, it turned out that the businessman from Southern California was a senior executive with a very large aerospace company, and he was delighted with the results I had turned in on that coordinate remote viewing. And he and other senior executives of this company provided me with 2 more lists of coordinates they wanted me to view. It was very interesting work. It was also, there was a large hassle factor. Not all of the aliens were friendly, and not all of them were willing to have my attention in their space.
Now,
and they pushed back.
Now, when you talk about not all of the aliens, were all of these additional coordinates here on Earth? And the reason I ask is, it sounds like you're saying that there are multiple alien species here. If I'm
Yes.
Okay.
That appears to be true. It took me quite a while to come to that conclusion. It's sort of a surprise. I mean, they never had that problem on Star Trek. But when you're looking at very, very advanced technology, it can be hard to tell what species created it. It's possible to see individual members of the various species. On the other hand, if you think about how varied human beings are here on Earth, We vary in skin color, height, many characteristics, and yet we're all human. There's no reason to think that aliens are any less variable than we are. So it was a difficult problem to come up with a way of deciding how many species were here. In the coordinate lists, which were all on Earth, all sites on Earth, I finally, in some cases it was easy to decide, in other cases it was difficult. I finally concluded that there were at least 3 alien species visiting Earth represented in that list. There was one category of aliens that I called Group A because they were the first ones I ran into. Then there was Group B, and then there were all the others, which were probably a large number of species, but I wouldn't be able to tell you how many. The coordinates on the list were principally Group A and Group B. A lot of Group B on that list.
Okay. So they were. I would say there was a diversity to it then. That would be fair to say. Now, can you tell me a little bit about these groups and how they're different from each other potentially?
Oh yes. Well, I'll try anyway. Let's see now. They differ in numerous ways. In the papers I've written on the subject, I spent most of the time on Group A and Group B. The reason is that they are relatively Earth-like. There are intelligences on the gas giant planets, but I was more concerned with the species visiting Earth here. We don't really have anything here that would appeal to the residents of the gas giants. Now, Group A and Group B are different forms of collective intelligence. Group A is a true group mind. It's extremely bright. There's no way to communicate that. It's an old species. It's very large and very widespread. They are travelers. They're tremendous travelers. They showed me where their origin was. If I had a map of the galaxy, I could point out where it is. It's across the galaxy, almost on the far edge, and on the opposite side of the plane of the ecliptic from us.
Now, you've said, if I could back up for just a second, you've said that these are closer to our form factor, our shape, if you will, I guess. Could you describe for me what Group A looks like? Are they relatively like us, or?
Yeah. Yes, they are, in that actually the two-legged, two-handed biped is a fairly successful design, and I've seen many versions of it. The units of Group A appear to be tall, thin bipeds with the chins look elongated to me. The individuals that comprise Group B, the units that comprise Group B, range all the way from short bipeds, short, not very intelligent bipeds, to taller, extremely intelligent bipeds. They have a caste structure. The impression you have as a viewer is that the caste structure is absolute. It is. It looks biologically determined to me.
Oh,
it's not
okay.
a social structure. It's a degree of specialization. The little short ones are, I believe, the ones commonly referred to as the Greys, and I think Whitley Strieber called them the Good Army.
Oh, okay. That was what I was wondering, because I think people are familiar to some degree with some of the archetypes, and so Group B would be the Greys, and then Group A, it sounds like perhaps looks more like us, if I'm interpreting that correctly.
Well, sorta. I think so, yes. But in Group B also contains taller units, and as they get taller, that's a higher caste, and they also become more intelligent. They are formidably intelligent. Not so hot on original thinking. They're not very creative thinkers, but their species has a huge advantage. They never forget anything. That's the subject of their success. So you can surprise them, but you can only surprise them one time. After that, they will develop a countermeasure, and every single one of their units will have it, no matter how far away they are in space and time from the original incident. Every single one of their units will have that countermeasure, and it'll be deployed immediately if the same approach is attempted again.
Now, the group B, because we're dealing with multiple ones, the A beings, the travelers as you've described them, they were the first that you made contact with, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then B, who were the more traditional Greys, and again, the reason I ask is, my understanding is that they're not supposed to be quite as friendly as Group A is.
You could put it that way, yes. Group B is colonizing Earth. Their behavior, and I've seen them do this on other worlds. I looked into their history. Their behavior is pretty consistent. At first, when the colonists show up, they keep a very low profile. They hide, they shun any contact with the life forms where they're setting up the colony. They build that colony underground. And as they build it, it develops capability. Essentially, they build an underground city with its own factories, its own infrastructure. Eventually, they become bolder and more confident. And as that underground base, or that underground city, develops capability, then they start scouting around the area. Eventually, when they feel they're strong enough, that base will repel any foreign technology. Now consider the significance. What that means is that one of these days, this species is going to lay claim to a piece of a major city.
Now, when you talk about scouting around, it sounds like from UFO reports, if the Greys or the Group B is actually doing this, and I think other people have said this, that there is potentially an underground base, an underground city being built. It sounds like they're in the scouting part of their mission right now.
Probably so. It's not in our interest to allow colonization, but at this point there's nothing we can do about it. We're just the ants at the picnic. And trying to militarize the interaction with Group B is definitely not in our interest as a species. They're simply too advanced.
Now, if I could go back to Group A for a moment, because you'd said that they have mutually independent interests. I guess that'd be the fair way to describe it, right? Perhaps, in a sense, all of these groups are travelers, and they're here for their own reasons. Could you tell me a little bit about what their interests are and how they might interact with Group B, if they do at all?
Well, they do interact, and they're not friendly. As a matter of fact, nobody in our part of the galaxy likes Group B, and some species are actively afraid of them. Nobody's happy about them setting up shop in this part of the galaxy. They came from a very long distance, by the way. Their homeworld is extremely far away. I don't know whether it's technically in another galaxy or not. It might just be an isolated star cluster. But they're not from here. Now, with regard to Group A, it took me quite some time to work out the purpose of their installation here. It is geographically convenient. They have a means of transporting, I think we would be inclined to say transporting materials instantaneously across very large distances of space. And this, the unit here, has a stage, has the apparatus to do that.
Are they mining?
I don't think I've seen Group A doing that, but I can't be sure. I can say that a lot of mining is obviously going on, I think Group B is obviously doing some, and probably other species are as well.
Okay, okay.
Also, the other thing about Group B, keep in mind that our biological resources, the Earth is a very unusual planet. If you could see what other intelligent species have to make do with in terms of a home planet, you'd realize just how precious our Earth is and how rare. We have biological diversity that is extremely unusual. This, I think, was probably a prime motive for Group B to come all this distance and set up a colony here. They expect to mine not only our physical resources, but our biological resources.
Oh, okay. The one thing that really makes Earth truly unique, because when you think about it, you can pick up minerals and materials pretty much anywhere in the universe, but their biology is really unique.
Yes, it is. And they're conducting biological studies on human beings. The biological studies they're doing are not intended to help human beings. They're intended to find out how we can be of use to them. Of course, one way in which we could be of use to them is to fix it so that our bodies produce biological substances that they want. We utilize animals for this purpose ourselves. Well, they plan to utilize us. It was discoveries of this sort that eventually made me decide that I really don't care for Group B. I don't particularly like them, and if I could find a way to remove them from our planet, I would. Right now, we do not have those means. And as I said, it would be a big mistake to try to go to war with them. If we actually got their attention, they'd bring out their equivalent of a can of Raid. I'm sure they've got one, and we do not want to see that.
Sure, sure.
In the meantime, over this has been going on for quite some while. And I learned a lot from Group A. Almost the first thing they ever said to me was, intelligent beings do not reason contrary to fact. Well, that made sense. But we are conventionally used to using contrary to fact expressions quite a lot. Every time I did it thereafter, Group A cut off communication. This was always frightening because I never was sure that they would come back and resume talking with me. So they taught me essentially how to communicate as an intelligent being and how to communicate without using any conditions contrary to fact.
Okay, I see what I see what you mean. Our speech, our language, because it developed organically and because it's so tied to our biology in so many ways, it does contain a lot of contradictions.
Yes, it does. And of course, the field of statistics is full of them.
Well, could you tell me a little bit more about Group A? Because again, this is the group that you initially made contact with. They seem the most amenable to communicating with us. It sounds like we have to communicate under certain conditions, but it sounds like you've learned a lot from them as well.
Yes, I certainly have. One of the things I learned, to my surprise, and it took about 7 months for this to happen, I had a dear friend who was having a big problem getting along with his in-laws. He was in a predicament, so I started writing him a letter, and I temporarily forgot about Group A. Well, as I'm writing this essay on what you owe to the community and what you owe to yourself as an individual, all of a sudden Group A broke in and said, "You speak of individuals. Are you one such?" Well, in this form of communication, you can't lie. It's just not possible to lie.
Sure.
Anyway,
Sure.
so I admitted it. And then Group A said, as they had said many times before, individual beings do not possess intelligence. That's what they believe. They believe that very strongly. But I guess I lost patience because I retorted, then how are we having this conversation? And they disconnected for a while, but subsequently returned, having rethought their whole position on this subject. They actually rethought an attitude that they had held for no telling how long, perhaps tens of thousands of years even, probably that long. And they designated whatever life form I was as potentially capable of having intelligence. And our conversation continued as before. They really did their best to answer every question that I asked. They were extremely patient, and their answers were very detailed. Now, if I could digress a little bit, in terms of acquiring technology, that's relatively easy to do if it isn't too far advanced beyond our current status. I spent a very long time, well, years, poring over Group A and Group B technology. I examined their industrial processes, the capabilities of their technology, how they did star travel, their approach to it. I looked into their mathematics, their history. I tried everything I could think of. And the net result, the bottom line here was, I concluded that Group B possesses technology that is a little bit like the technology that we would have if our technology continued to evolve for, say, another couple thousand years. Now, human societies tend not to hold up that long, but if you could imagine us continuing to develop science for another couple thousand years, we'd have something like what Group B now has.
So in other words, it's very similar to ours, but incrementally better, except in this case, increments upon increments for a couple of thousand years.
Yes, but looking at their industrial processes, Group B has a huge industrial base. It composes a number of planets. I concluded finally that we could not duplicate any of their technology here on Earth. We just don't have the resources for it. If you live on a coral atoll and that's all you have to work with, you're not going to be building F-16s. It's just not possible.
Sure.
Even if they cooperated, and of course they would not cooperate because it's not in their interest to help us in any way. Now with Group A, their technology is very simple. And if we can understand how it works, that is technology that we could build. It has the potential, for instance, of instantaneous transportation that's very energy efficient. You can go from point to point with very little energy expended. The energy expended has nothing to do with the conventional mass of the objects that you send or the distance, the geographical distance between the 2 points.
So you're really talking about teleportation. I think you voiced that earlier. And would this be something? Would wormholes play a factor? Maybe that's not the best term to describe it, but
well, doesn't look that way to me. It was studying alien technology is very good exercise for your brain. And it's inspirational in that the one thing you can easily do is take our scientific theories and beliefs and compare them with the beliefs and theories of a species that has mastered star travel. And it gives you an insight into just how primitive our technology is compared to theirs.
Yeah. It seems like starting out, that would almost be where you'd have to start. Just comparing, what do we believe versus what do they believe, and then ruling out a lot.
Yes, ruling out almost everything. But teleportation, faster than light travel, much faster than light travel, certainly is possible because I've seen them do it. And it's a physical possibility. Well, I don't know. I thought of a way to do it. That's my development, possible states theory. There are, right now, at least 4 different approaches to the problem of faster than light travel. I'm talking about current approaches that Earth scientists have come up with. We're very close to being able to get off the planet. We're extremely close.
Now, do you think that our relationship with ET will change once we leave Earth? And I realize this isn't an instantaneous thing. I would imagine it's not like Star Trek. It would probably be over time, right? Like we're doing now. You start with probes, and then you go to astronauts, and then maybe a small colony. Do you think that our relationship with ET would change? Do you think that if we set up a colony on Mars, we would find the Greys there too, that they might follow us there? Or do you think that they're primarily just interested in Earth?
Well, one thing I think we should assume is that every habitable planet is inhabited, has life on it, and that much of this life is technologically advanced, intelligent and technologically advanced. Therefore, it's incumbent on human beings to learn how to get along with others. We need to learn to make friends, to make alliances, and to give up the notion of territorial warfare. That's a tall order, but it's what we need to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just growing outside of the box, I guess.
Well, you see, territorial warfare is an instinct among human beings. We evolved in small groups, say small tribes, essentially large extended families. Each tribe had its own hunting grounds, and they were relatively isolated from other tribes. The instinct to defend your homeland and your family against strangers is very strong in us. This instinct won't serve us well in the greater universe. There's no reason to assume that other species, other intelligences, are going to attack us. Group B is somewhat unusual in that regard. They do colonize, and they don't cooperate well. Their natural tendency is to develop and push out all others, certainly all advanced species on the planets that they successfully colonize.
Now, you've written a paper about this, and you've actually put a lot of this into a paper called Out There, a preliminary discussion of alien civilizations. And this is something that you'll be publishing soon. And you've discussed a lot of these aspects of it. Actually, for me, this was an amazing read. Very well, very scientifically written. And I think that you're able to maintain a very neutral tone writing it, and you describe in detail. And I'm wondering, if people wanted to learn more about this, how can they get in touch with you?
You're welcome to give out my email address. I'd kind of prefer it go to people who have directly asked for it.
And then the paper itself, this is something that's currently in publication, so people might be able to see this perhaps at a later point if they request it. But for the moment, it's not public.
No, it's going through the process of publication. It's not. I don't. Let's see. This is October, isn't it? It might be available around the end of the month. I just don't know yet.
Yeah, because, one of the things in the conclusion of your paper, you write, in the beginning the colonizers had an advantage. Their system contained another habitable planet. And it presents that kind of as an achievable goal, right? Almost like the space race to get to the moon for us. And you described basically a population pressure to get there. They destroyed their ecosystem and needed to move. And so it's a very interesting conclusion, and I'm wondering if something similar, if just knowing that it's possible, could motivate humans the same way that knowing that another habitable planet was out there motivated them.
Yes, I think that's the attraction of Mars. I believe we can live on Mars. Some adjustments would have to be made, and we'd need to make some technological improvements. But actually, it's a much more friendly place than the moon.
Do you think that ET might assist us with anything like this? Or are they maintaining their own separate paths and trying to stay out of each other's way on Earth?
Well, I think Group A is willing to assist us in principle. And indeed, if I pose a question, they'll answer it. The problem with asking direct questions is this. If you think about the length of time that we've had an organized, technologically viable society, that can actually be measured really in terms of hundreds of years. The development train for Group A is absolutely enormous. I would not be at all surprised if you could actually know. I guess I would have to say that it probably is at least 2 million years old. That species is very old. And unlike us, they have not been devastated by frequent wars and the collapse of civilizations. That's been a human problem for a long, long time. We build up a civilization, it becomes sophisticated, then for whatever reason it collapses. The survivors live in mud huts for a while, and then it starts all over.
Yeah.
We don't have continuous development, but we could have it.
Well, I think science fiction writers have addressed this, and I think one of the things that's interested me is some of them have said that the chaos that our society has had, that human society has had over the last several thousand years, might actually be our gift. That might be kind of our birthright. Whereas the stability that other civilizations might have had could almost lead to stagnation. Do you think that might be the case, or?
Well, I haven't seen that, but other species are organized much differently than we are. Here, let me share with you something about these other species in general that was a great surprise to me. Every one that I looked at, every spacefaring species that I have seen so far, is some form of collective intelligence. Group A, to all intents and purposes, Group A is a single mind. Group B is more like an ant colony with specialization among its members. But even so, the units in Group B have very limited self-determination. They have more as you go up higher in caste. After you get sufficiently high in caste, the units actually worry about performing their jobs correctly. Because
Okay.
if they don't, if a unit makes a mistake, and that mistake is considered expensive, more expensive than the value of that unit, they scrap that unit. And some of these units are developed enough to fear personal extinction.
Yeah.
I haven't looked to see exactly how they do it. I decided I just didn't need to know that. But I'm positive that they do it. Other species, though, have different forms of collective intelligence. And this is something I think we humans will need to learn to do. We need to learn to combine in mind with each other. And it is possible to do that.
Well, on that note, I should wrap things up for today. But Shelley, I want to sincerely thank you for sharing everything with us about all your experiences. And I have no doubts that people will have more questions. Perhaps we can do a follow-up interview if you're interested in that.
Yes, I would be interested because I left out an awful lot.
Yeah, oh yeah, I know. The paper that you've written on this is just astonishingly detailed and again, incredibly well written. And I would love to touch more on this in the future. But for the time being, let me let you go, and I want to thank you yet again for your time.
You're so welcome, Tim. Thank you for the invitation.